30% of women who break a hip don't make it. What does it mean? This statistic is alarming and to many people seems almost unbelievable. It suggests that 30% of women who suffer a hip fracture die within a certain time period after the fracture. Don't make it. 2. Understand this claim, we need to clarify. 1. What time period is being referenced? Usually this refers to 1 year following the hip fracture. Some sources say within a year or during the 1 year post-fracture period. 2. Which population is covered? Age, health status, country, treatment setting. 3. What causes of death are included? Directly from hip fracture or its complications, or all cause mortality? 4. How women is defined. Older women, for example, aged 65 or 75 plus, or all adult women? Evidence. What do medical studies show? Many epidemiological and clinical studies have looked at mortality, death, following hip fracture. Key findings. A systematic review/trend analysis by Downey et al., 2019, notes that traditionally 1 year mortality post-hip fracture has been around 30% for older patients, and more recently sometimes described as about a third. PMC. Another study, Oguzhan-Ilescas et al., 2019, found that in women the 1 year mortality after hip fracture was about 30%, and for men even higher, 43% in that Spanish cohort. Biomed Central. Approximately. Some studies report somewhat lower numbers, depending on age, country, and quality of medical care, often in the range of 15 to 25%. For example, a recent BMC geriatric study reports approximately 17.7% 1 year mortality in a study with approximately 945 patients, 59% of them women. Biomed Central. In Incidence and Mortality of Hip Fractures in the United States, Brower et al., 2009, authors say about 30% of people with a hip fracture will die in the following year, though that is for the general older population, not only women. JAMA Network. So, the 30% figure is supported in some contexts, especially among older women with hip fractures in certain geographic areas and with certain healthcare systems. But it is not universal or constant. Why is mortality so high after hip fracture? A hip fracture in older people is not just a broken bone, it disrupts many aspects of health. Some contributing factors are age and frailty. Many hip fractures occur in people who are already elderly, possibly with coexisting health problems, comorbidities, like heart disease, lung disease, kidney failure, etc. These reduce reserve and ability to recover. Immobility and complications. After a hip fracture, patients often become bedridden or much less mobile for some time. This increases risks of pneumonia, blood clots, deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism, pressure, right arrow, sores, infections, muscle wasting, etc. Surgical risk and timing. Many hip fractures require surgery, delays in surgery, or suboptimal surgical care increase. Mortality. Risks from anesthesia. Post-operative complications also play a role. Nutrition, pre-existing Health, rehab. Poor nutritional status fracture functional dependence. Cognitive impairment, for example. Dementia and insufficient. Rehabilitation care reduce chances of good recovery and increase risk of death. Limitations and caveats. It's important not to oversimplify or overgeneralize. Some caveats. Variation by region/country. Mortality rates differ between countries, depending on healthcare systems, availability, and speed of surgery, post-operative care, rehabilitation, social supports. Variation by age. Younger elderly, for example, 65 to 75, tend to fare better. As age increases, 80 plus, 85 plus, risk of mortality rises. Variation by healthy baseline. If someone is relatively healthy before the fracture, good mobility, fewer comorbidities, their risk is lower than someone already frail. Time frame matters. The 30% often refers to 1-year mortality. If you look at 30-day mortality, mortality is much lower. Often single digits to low double digits. Over longer periods, excess risk persists, but some deaths will be from unrelated causes. Cause versus correlation. The hip fracture often reveals or precipitates problems, but is not necessarily the only cause of death. Sometimes the fracture accelerates decline, but underlying disease burden is significant. Implications. What does this mean for individuals and health systems? Given that hip fractures in older women are associated with high mortality, there are several important implications. 1. Prevention is key. Prevent falls, safe home environments, balance and strength training. Exercises. Address bone health, screening for osteoporosis, vitamin D, calcium. Possibly medications that strengthen bone. Lifestyle, nutrition, exercise, avoid smoking, moderate alcohol. 2. Rapid and high-quality medical care. Timely surgery. Many guidelines suggest surgery within 24 to 48 hours. If possible. Multidisciplinary management, orthopedic plus geriatric care. Managing comorbidities aggressively. 3. Post-operative care and rehabilitation. Physical therapy to regain mobility. Prevent complications, infections, clotting, etc. Nutritional support, social support, home or institutional support if needed. 4. Awareness and education. For patients and families, understanding that a hip fracture is a serious event, not just a broken bone. For clinicians, identifying which patients are at highest risk and tailoring care accordingly. Conclusion. The statement, 30% of women who break a hip don't make it, is grounded in epidemiological data. In many studies, 1-year mortality after hip fracture in older women is indeed around 30%, sometimes lower, sometimes higher, depending on context. However, that statistic needs to be understood with nuance. Who, where, when, what pre-existing health, what kind of care they receive. It underscores how serious hip fractures are in the elderly, not just because of the fracture itself, but because of what follows: decreased mobility, risk of complications, and how that interacts with aging and disease. For individuals and healthcare systems, this statistic reinforces the urgency of prevention, fast and good treatment, and excellent rehabilitation.